What if I told you that the most spiritual person you know might have the most toxic shadow of all? What if your meditation practice, your chakra healing, your manifestation rituals are actually feeding a darkness you can't even see? This isn't an attack on spirituality. This is Carl Jung's most controversial discovery about the spiritual ego, and understanding it will revolutionize how you approach your own spiritual journey. But here's what nobody in the spiritual community wants to talk about. The higher you climb spiritually, the darker your shadow can become. The more light you claim to embody, the more darkness you might be denying. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why Jung believes spiritual people often have the most dangerous shadows of all. Let me start with a story that will make you question everything. There was a renowned spiritual teacher, thousands of followers, teaching love and light and universal consciousness. She preached non-judgment, complete acceptance, transcending the ego. Her workshops were transformational. People left feeling enlightened, connected to Source, above the petty concerns of regular life. But behind closed doors, she was a nightmare. Viciously critical of anyone who questioned her, manipulative with money, sexually inappropriate with students. When confronted, she had a spiritual explanation for everything. Critics were low vibration. Complaints were ego resistance. Anyone who left was not ready for the truth. This isn't a rare case. This is Jung's spiritual shadow in action. And it happens because spirituality, more than almost any other pursuit, allows us to bypass our shadow rather than face it. Jung observed this phenomenon throughout his career. He worked with countless spiritual seekers, religious leaders, mystics, and he discovered something disturbing. The people who identified most strongly as spiritual often had the most repressed shadows. Why? Because spirituality gave them the perfect excuse to avoid their darkness. Think about what happens in many spiritual communities. Anger is low vibration. Sexual desire is base. Material success is unspiritual. Competition is ego. Boundaries are separation. Critical thinking is being in your head. Normal human emotions and needs get labeled as things to transcend rather than integrate. But here's Jung's crucial insight. You cannot transcend what you haven't first integrated. You cannot rise above your shadow by pretending it doesn't exist. When spiritual people try to bypass their humanity to reach divinity, they don't eliminate their shadow. They supercharge it. The spiritual shadow is particularly dangerous because it hides behind noble ideals. It uses spiritual language to justify shadow behavior. I'm not angry. I'm just speaking my truth. I'm not controlling. I'm holding space. I'm not avoiding responsibility. I'm surrendering to the universe. I'm not being cruel. I'm being a mirror for your growth. Let me give you specific examples of how spiritual shadows manifest. The guru who preaches ego death while building a cult of personality around themselves. The healer who talks about serving others while charging desperate people thousands for basic advice. The yoga teacher who promotes body acceptance while secretly judging everyone's appearance. The manifestation coach who blames people's poverty on their victim mindset while ignoring systemic inequalities. These aren't just hypocrites. These are people whose shadows have grown so large, so denied, that they've taken over the entire personality while wearing a spiritual mask. Identified specific shadows that plague spiritual people. First, there's the shadow of superiority. When you believe you're more evolved, more conscious, more awakened than others, you've fallen into spiritual ego. Your shadow contains the very judgment and separation you claim to have transcended. Second, there's the shadow of spiritual bypassing. This is using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with real psychological wounds. Everything happens for a reason becomes an excuse not to grieve. I attract my reality. becomes a way to avoid taking responsibility for harm caused to others. Love and light becomes a denial of legitimate anger. Third, there's the shadow of the body. Many spiritual traditions teach transcending the physical, but Jung saw this as dangerous shadow creation. The denied body doesn't disappear. It shows up as secret addictions, sexual scandals, health problems that shouldn't happen to someone so spiritual. Fourth, there's the shadow of ordinariness. Spiritual people often can't stand being ordinary. The shadow contains the regular person who just wants to watch TV, eat junk food, have petty thoughts. This denied ordinariness often erupts in private binges or secret shameful behaviors. But here's the most dangerous spiritual shadow of all, the shadow of darkness itself. When you identify as a being of light, when you believe you've transcended darkness, your shadow becomes the repository of all the darkness you won't acknowledge. And denied darkness doesn't become light. It becomes evil. This is why Jung was so critical of spiritual movements that only focused on light, love, and transcendence. He saw them as shadow-creating machines. The more you identify with the light, the more you feed your dark shadow. The more you claim to be beyond ego, the more your ego runs things from the unconscious. I worked with someone who exemplified this perfectly. She'd been on the spiritual path for 20 years. Meditation, plant medicine, energy work, the whole journey. She saw herself as a light worker, here to raise the planet's consciousness. She spoke about unconditional love and acceptance. But her relationships told a different story. She'd cut off anyone who challenged her beliefs. She'd rage at people who were unconscious. She'd gossip viciously about those who left her spiritual community, calling them lost souls who chose fear over love. Her own children felt constantly judged for being too worldly. When she finally faced her shadow, she broke down completely. Beneath all the light and love was a cauldron of rage, judgment, superiority, and disgust for ordinary human life. She'd been using spirituality to feel special, to feel above others, to avoid dealing with her own deep wounds and human needs. But here's the transformation that's possible. When she integrated her spiritual shadow, she didn't become less spiritual. She became genuinely spiritual for the first time. She could be with people's darkness without trying to fix it. She could feel anger without calling it something else. She could want material things without shame. She could be ordinary without losing her connection to the extraordinary. This is Jung's message for spiritual people. Your shadow isn't the opposite of your spirituality. It's the foundation your genuine spirituality needs to be built on. You can't reach heaven by denying earth. You can't find God by rejecting your humanity. You can't embody love by exiling hate. The integrated spiritual person is radically different from the spiritual bypasser. They can hold both light and dark. They can be both divine and deeply human. They can access transcendent states without using them to escape difficult emotions. They can teach spiritual truths while acknowledging their own ongoing shadow work. Jung himself was deeply spiritual, but he insisted on staying grounded in the full spectrum of human experience. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the spiritual path that includes the shadow rather than denying it. So how do you work with spiritual shadow? First, notice what you judge in non-spiritual people. Do you look down on those who care about money? There's your material shadow. Do you judge people who express anger? There's your aggressive shadow. Do you feel superior to those who aren't awakened? There's your ego shadow. Second, examine how you use spiritual concepts to avoid human experiences. Do you transcend anger instead of feeling it? Do you surrender instead of taking action? Do you focus on higher vibrations to avoid difficult emotions? These are shadow indicators. Third, Look at what you're not allowed to be in your spiritual community. What would get you judged or excluded? Those forbidden qualities are in your shadow. Growing stronger every day, you deny them. The truth is, authentic spirituality includes everything. It includes your rage and your reverence, your lust and your love, your pettiness and your profundity, your humanity and your divinity. When you can hold all of it, you don't need to use spirituality to bypass your shadow. You use it to integrate your shadow. This is why Jung's work is so crucial for spiritual people. It's not anti-spiritual. It's pro-wholeness. It's about becoming genuinely spiritual by including what most spiritual paths exclude. It's about finding God, not by rejecting the devil, but by understanding that both exist within you. Your spiritual shadow is calling you to a deeper spirituality, one that doesn't need to deny any part of human experience, one that can dance with darkness as gracefully as it dances with light, one that finds the sacred in the profane and the profane in the sacred. Because ultimately, Jung discovered the most spiritual thing you can do is embrace your complete humanity, shadow and all.